Okay, hi Jana, hi Tracy. Hello everyone. It's just past 1 o'clock, so we're going to get started. I'd just like to welcome you to the first webinar in our new webinar series, Let's Talk About. So we're going to be talking about topics related to hospice palliative care every Thursday at 1 o'clock until the end of the year. So I'd like to welcome our first guests, Jana Brogan and Tracy Vigars. Jana is a death doula certified in contemplative end-of-life care. She received her certification through the Institute of Traditional Medicine in Toronto, where she's also studying therapeutic clinical herbal medicine. So welcome, Jana.
Hi, thank you.
And I'll just introduce Tracy. Tracy also attended the Institute of Traditional Medicine to learn more about contemplative end-of-life care. She remains passionate as a death doula in helping others become comfortable in conversations around end of life and ensuring that one's end is as beautiful as their beginning. So thank you both for coming today or joining us online, and I will pass it over to you.
Okay, Allison, just before you pass it over to us, can you hear us all right?
I just need to turn up my volume. There we go.
Okay, now I was just wondering if I don't know if in this particular format there's a chat section if people have questions. I don't know that I will see their chats if they come up. I'm not sure how this is set up, but often we'll do.
I was wondering the same thing. We're new to the webinar thing, so I didn't see a chat spot, but I'm going to work on it.
If you look at the bottom of your screen,
Yep.
do you see that there's a chat button?
No.
Oh, you don't. Okay. I'm wondering if.
Oh,
Okay.
yes, I got it. Yes, I've got it here.
Okay, so if someone wants to just type in a question or something random, we'll just see how that works, and then we'll know that we can answer questions as we go along from our participants.
Okay.
Okay, we're good. Okay, there is a chat. Beautiful. So we are good to go. And Allison, then we're going to answer questions as they come up. But I don't know if you want to if you usually dedicate some time at the end of the presentation and open it up to discussion and conversation also.
Yep, we can do that. Yep.
Okay, so we're done at 2:15.
Yep.
So do we want to leave the last 15 minutes then so that we can just have dialogue, and we will try to answer what we can as we go along also.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you for a lovely introduction. Okay. So I'm Jana and this is Tracy, and we're going to be your tour guides through this lovely dialogue about death today. And as Allison mentioned, we're both death doulas, and we're just getting ready to launch our business. Up till this point, we've just been speaking in the community and having dialogue with people, but we're just getting ready to launch ourselves and to have some more formalized educational events and community events around death. But today we're just here to talk about death in an open and frank manner and to give you a brief overview of what we do. And I say brief because the role of death doula can be many, many different things depending on the clients we have or the role that we're currently filling within the community. But primarily, the role of a death doula in the community is education. Like that's one of the big ones. We're here to help facilitate the death journey. We're not doctors. We are not nurses. We are not lawyers. We're not legal professionals. Good to get that out there right away. So we are not there to advise clients or the community in any of those areas. We are here, however, to answer questions they have in those areas and to direct them to people who can further help them with legal questions or medical questions. But we are part of the caregiving team for end-of-life care, and we consider ourselves to be facilitators. So we work with the clients and the client's family and the community at large, and we can interface with the doctors or the PSWs and just help to communicate what a client's wishes are and to support the client and the family and the community at large that way. So Tracy, I'll let you just give a little information.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jana. So personally, my outlook toward death, was awakened a couple of years ago when our longtime caregiver for my children passed away, and she became part of our family since my boys were, very, very young. She was at every, family celebration, Christmas. She came on family trips with us. She was quite a remarkable woman, and she had no children of her own, and she had no family here. And so when she had a heart attack, she was 90 years old. And what happened subsequently and very quickly, and she ended up in short order in a nursing home, and within a month died. The way that all went down, and the days leading up to her death, this was a very dignified woman, and very proud, and just the way she died was really tragic, and I never forgot that, and I'm very grateful to Betty, because it really, really sparked my interest in there must be a better way, and with planning and expressing your wishes and communication and making death part of your daily dialogue. And I know in my family, and even now, if I bring that topic up to my two boys, I'm not comfortable with that. There's this discomfort, and then as I look at my own family, and I have 6 siblings that are rather large family, it's never talked about. And then, so that's, I think, my role is to start to, even within my own family and my extended family, to start to help, death become just a natural topic, like we would, here's my list of to-dos today, I'm going to the grocery store, just natural. But there's such a fear, and then when that happens, it's so emotionally charged, and there's so many factors, so it can look a very different way with some planning and some dialogue.
And so myself, I never really thought about death in a larger context. Like, what can it look like? What does it mean? It was just always something that was dreaded. I had older grandparents. I was lucky that my grandparents lived into my 30s, but a really small family. And I realized when I had to take a primary role in being the primary caregiver for my grandparents in their death, because my own mother, my mom just wasn't capable of doing it, that there is, and then in subsequent deaths I've attended, and people whom I have loved that have passed, there is such dysfunction in death. This is such an important transitional time in life. It can be a very beautiful time, but it can also be a time when everything unravels, and when families fall to pieces, and when there are a lot of hard feelings, and when some of the things that happen through death aren't easily healed. And I was able to witness dysfunction and see just how difficult it was for everyone involved, but primarily the person who was dying. And it really shifted my paradigm to understand that this time isn't about me and my discomfort, and it's not about things that I have not corrected or amends I have not made. This is a very intimate and fleeting time for the person who is palliative and who is passing. So I decided that there must be, again, in Tracy's words, a better way to do this. From my opinion, most of us were just fumbling through this time, this precious time. And I've heard people say to me on numerous occasions, I wish I could remember. I don't even remember my mother's death. It was so scary. There was so many things going on, and I wasn't really present. And I think that's a tragedy. So Tracy and I, at the same time, unbeknownst to one another, were both looking for training. And we came across the contemplative end of life at the Institute of Traditional Medicine, and we decided to attend. And so the training for a death doula, so in Canada, we cannot be called a death midwife. We're not legally allowed to be called a death midwife. In the US and in other countries, death doulas can go by midwife. So we were able to train at the Institute of Traditional Medicine in a really intensive program, and we studied with some really phenomenal people. We studied with First Nations, Indigenous elders. We studied with some, like a Buddhist monk. We had palliative care nurses who've only ever worked in home hospice and specialized in home death. We were able to spend a weekend with a nurse practitioner who specializes in home death. We were able to visit the big crematorium at Mount Pleasant and, you know, walk through the crematorium and see what that aspect of end of life looks like. We were able to meet with lawyers and funeral directors. So we were, and we were also exposed to different cultural traditions while we were training, as well as doing some pretty significant personal work, you know, emotional work, and unearthing our own concepts and our own look, you know, really examining what our lens was that we were viewing death through, because we can only go as far with our clients as we have gone with ourselves, you know, and it's so true about so many areas of life, but you really have to be prepared to do your own emotional work and come to terms with things and really sit with what is death. We were really fortunate. I just have a book here. Where did I put it? We were able to study with a really great man who started the death doula movement in, I don't know, my book is on the death doula movement in North America. And he also founded the International Death Doula Association. And he works in the States, but he travels up for training, Henry. And I remember sitting in a room full of people with whom I thought had more credentials than I did. We had, you know, people who ran hospice and people we had doctors with us, and we had nurses and palliative care nurses. And there I was at that time, just a working artist and, you know, running a restaurant. And I said to Henry, you know, really, should I be here? What kind of prerequisites should someone really have to become a death doula? And he said, the only prerequisite to becoming a death doula is having an open heart. That is the only thing that you need to have. And so that made me feel certainly much stronger and much more able to carry out this task in the community. And, you know, he reminded us that this is something that we know how to do. Death at home or death in hospice or death in the hospital, we do not have to be removed from that process. We are community. You know, we are small communities, a husband and wife. We're larger communities with our family, whatever our family looks like. And then our community grows with our, you know, with our friends, and then the community at large. But communities have always looked after each other in death, you know, before industrialization, and still in so many cultures around the world. You know, my own grandmother, you know, and her grandfather was born at, well, her dad was born at the farm and lived at the farm and spent his whole life on the farm, and he died on the farm. They had his wake on the farm, and my mother remembers seeing him. My mother, like, they waked him in the parlor, and his coffin and his body were on the dining room table in the parlor, you know. And at that time, and during his illness, the community members rallied. You know, they brought food, they sat with the family, they took care of the farm, they helped out with chores, and they really supported my family during that time. And that was common, like that was the way it worked. And then, you know, and then when the next person was sick, everyone would converge and offer support for the family. And we knew how to do that because people lived with death. It wasn't so sanitized. We didn't put it away in a neat package in the hospital and not deal with it. So part of our role is just to help support the community remember how to do this, because it is within each one of us, you know, to be present, to hold space with each other and with more than each other, you know, as our community expands, and just to really understand that, you know, death is truly something that we're not going to avoid. Like, I know we know that, but people don't really know that. It's something we think we can, you know, out moisturize or, you know, eat enough green foods or superfoods that we're going to somehow get out of this, and we're not. So I think it's part of what we are hoping to do is just to constantly have this dialogue within our community in different different forms and formats, and through workshops and through speaking engagements and on one-on-one, and just guide people through this process of holding space, and what does it look like, and what does it mean, and how can we help you facilitate this dialogue, this event. And there's when you're looking at the role of death doula, we generally break the services into different sections. So there is, and then we can talk about those in more length, but there is pre-diagnosis, which is ideally where we would like to speak to everyone before you get a diagnosis, before you're sick, before anything happens. And then we can have open and creative dialogue about what death looks like. What do you want your death to look like? Again, not from a legal or medical perspective, but how do you really want to be remembered? How do you want your last days to look? How do you, what is your legacy? What do you still need to put in order so that you can leave this earth knowing that everything has been taken care of? So there's pre-diagnosis, then we'll see a lot of people post-diagnosis, because that's when the reality of death becomes really present for people, and suddenly they're faced with all kinds of not just tasks that must be accomplished, but all kinds of emotions and questions and considerations that they've never really looked at before. So that is when death doulas see many people. Then there's something called legacy, which is a really fun process, and it's great. We should all be working on our legacy every day of our lives, but again, it's kind of like your bucket list, but a little different. So most people put it off until, they're given an actual timeline. But legacy is literally, what are you leaving behind? And I don't mean money, and I don't mean a big house. I mean, what is your legacy to your children, your community, your partner? Who were you? What is your passion? What has your life been about? There is such richness in every person's story, and such richness in the tapestry they weave in a lifetime. So who are you? And how can we record this, or how can we pass this along so we don't lose that bright thread from our community? So some people, it's a really personal legacy, mother to daughter. They do a cookbook as an example, all of the favorite recipes that they worked on together or that were part of their life. It might be something more intimate for a partner. Maybe it's a book of poetry, or maybe it's a book of photographs of places we've been, or something that has been so meaningful to me in my experience with my partner. And then we go from there. And maybe it's a community legacy. Maybe you work with, maybe you were an avid gardener and want to do something in that vein for your community, and have a park space or a garden in your name or your memory. Or then maybe you have loftier legacy. Maybe there's something you've been passionate about that you've been working on your whole life, maybe rights, or maybe a movement. And how do we help you articulate that? Legacy is sort of like, how do we punctuate your story and edit your story and have it ready for the period at the end of it, to encapsulate who you were and how you're leaving that to the people or friends that you love. So that's an interesting and really fun part. It can be artistic, you can do, some people do, it's really fun to do a scroll, like a timeline that shows all of the important events in your life. And it's amazing what we have done in a lifetime that we don't credit, that we don't even think about. But when you take the time to go through and do year by year of a life, it's just amazing what people have done. So that's kind of a beautiful example of legacy. And then there's also something called vigil, which I'm sure your volunteers will be quite familiar with. And vigil is what happens during the active phase of death. And vigil can be whatever someone wants it to be, as long as they've taken the time to articulate and plan out. And I think many people don't even know they have an option to plan out what their vigil, what that phase of active dying is going to look like. Where do you want to be? which is a good place to start. It's not always possible to be where you want to be. If you can't be where you want to be, how can we help you create the feeling that you are where you want to be? And what do you want around you? What kind of sights and sounds and smells and people do you want with you? Do you want, you know, a visitor's book? Like, it's a very personal experience. And I know in school, we had to go through the process of planning our vigil and really sitting with it. And I thought I had mine all figured out until I really sat with it and realized it looked nothing like, it was so unrealistic, you know. I was planning like a tea party, but that's really not what vigil is, you know, because we have to remember we might be very ill, we might be very tired, we might not even be conscious at that stage. So really, how are we going to create this sacred space for you? And then there is often post-vigil death doulas can help too, depending on what the client had requested or what the agreement was, you know, helping with a celebration of life or ceremony or having a role at the funeral, helping facilitate. It just depends on, again, the individual and the client's requirements. Because when we're hired by a client, we work for that client. And ultimately, we follow their lead, and not necessarily that of the family, although there's a very fine line at the end of the day, you know. It is a fine line. If there are different opinions or views, we still have to remain on the side of the law and to defer to the people who have the actual authority to make choices, but we do our best to facilitate for our client. And that's one of the most important reasons to have dialogue about death, so there is no misunderstanding at the end, you know. And Trace, do you have anything to add to that?
No, but I just wanted to share a story, just a personal story that helped me realize as well how important it is to do this planning, not like much earlier in your life, like now. And as young as you are, you know, it may evolve and change over the years, but I think to be able to share and document and speak to your family about what the end of your life might look like if it did happen next week or next month. And 6 years ago yesterday, my stepmother she passed away. She had a catastrophic stroke, sudden, unexpected, and it was a very, very difficult time because she was sort of 4 days at the hospital. So sorry. 4 days in the hospital on life support while the family gathered, and there are again 7 of us with spouses and nieces and nephews, and then trying to care for my father, who you know, didn't seem quite present, probably in shock and whatever. And those days were filled, you know, there was a lot of conflict within the family. So none of her wishes were documented, and we didn't know what she would have wanted. And I'm not even sure anyone even thought of that. And I have an older sister who is lovely, but tends to be quite controlling and a very big, you know, big energy. And she just kind of took over. And so when we did make the decision for Bev, for her to be extubated and to be let go, you know, it was very, very devastating. And what really struck me is that night, we had to write an obituary. We had to make arrangements with the funeral home. We had to figure out what we were going to do. We had family coming in. Where were they going to stay? There was all kinds of those matters, you know, to deal with. And my dad was not capable at the time. And, you know, so sort of 3 days later, we had it truly was a remarkable mass at the church. There was no visitation, no funeral home. And then we had this celebration of life that my sister orchestrated. And I mean, it was amazing. But the people at the hall, she rented a hall, there was live music, there was a buffet it was a wedding. It was like, that's what the people said. There was an open bar. I mean, I'm not sure that that's what my stepmother would have wanted, but that's what she got. So it just struck me that we spent, this death happened suddenly, unexpectedly. Instead of being able to be there for her and to be present and to hold space and to help send her off, it was filled with so much conflict and chaos. And then the days that followed where was there time to grieve? It was all making arrangements, right? And I look back at that almost immediately. It just didn't feel right. It just didn't, something was wrong, at that moment too. And I thought, how could this be done different? And I think that was perhaps the start of going down this path to seek a better way, right? And so I think that's really something to think about. And in my own life, again, that wonderful older controlling sister, I know that she needs to be, I need to have a plan, because she's the type of person who would be trying to feed you. And she just wouldn't understand because she doesn't know, and she means well. But in your last days, you're not wanting to eat, your body's shutting down, and it just could be awful, right? So, and I wouldn't want a turkey dinner cooking in the kitchen. That's not the smell I would want, so all these little details, about planning. Why not start now? Because the reality is, and the truth is, we don't know when something could happen. It would be wonderful if we could all, live to 85, and then we, age takes over and we just die naturally, but that is not at all the case. So if some of these details are documented and shared beforehand, I think that's what it does allow is for the family to grieve, right? And to know what the wishes are, instead of trying to, just try and make the arrangements. And I don't agree with what my sister did, and my younger sister certainly didn't. And then there's this conflict, right? And so I think the better prepared we can be, the easier it is possibly for the families, for those left behind or those with us in our final days and hours, that they can just, just grieve. And planning will never take away grief. It is not meant to make it easier, right? Death is very, very hard, and the emotions and the feelings are very, very difficult, and we have all been through it. But the planning just allows for a different experience, I think, So,
right. And really lets us sit with the grief, because we should sit with the grief. These are people we love. These are like incredibly important people that we've, lived our lives with or raised, or whatever the circumstances are. They deserve for us to be present, and we deserve to be present, because we're never going to have this time again to share with them or to honor them, And Tracy and I sometimes talk about the different gifts that death can bring if you're, open to having death in your life and in your dialogue. And I like to say to my kids that I'm courting death. I'm old-fashioned. I'm just softly and quietly, in fun ways, getting to know death and the concept of death, because I don't want to be face-to-face in bed with death at the end of my life, never having known death, right? So it's important to me that I bring death into, celebrations and to carry the thread of people who've been here before and talk about them. And for me, that's all part of death is the people who have gone before us and what our legacy is, And we were also talking about one of the gifts that death can bring is an opportunity to really know someone in a way that you've never known them before. And I use my grandmother as an example, because I knew her as her granddaughter, and she was just my Nana, and she was remarkable, but I didn't know her as a woman and as a professional, and what her, as someone who lived through the war, who was a nurse during the war, who used to, drink at speakeasies, and, my Nana. And sometimes it is when people are dying that other people come forward, and we really get to flesh out who these loved ones are. And it can really, it just makes them into real people. And many people in this day and age are not able to have celebrations of life or any kind of ceremony, or people are, not wanting to spend the money now. Things are changing when it comes to funeral. And end of life celebrations. But one of the gifts of a celebration or end of life, whatever you want it to look like, is the opportunity for these stories to come forward. It's an opportunity for people who have known you to share their stories about you and to share a different face that your family might not have known. And it's really gratifying as a granddaughter to find out, you know, that my grandmother had the best shot on the farm, and that she won awards as a gun shooter, and she competed as a square dancer, like things that, you know, she just took for granted and I didn't know about her. But they really do create legacy. You know, they really helped me understand who she was, and maybe why she made some of the choices she made, or why she reacted sometimes the way she did. And you know, when someone passes, all of their memories are gone. I can no longer access my grandmother's, you know, Nana, tell me about this, or Nana, tell me about that. I can't do that anymore. And I don't think any of us pay as much attention as we should. So legacy, like death, does bring that as a gift too. And that's another important reason why legacy is important, you know, I think.
Absolutely.
For me.
And when we talk about legacy, because we explore this with each other, and I love some of the things Jana does with her children, and they'll make recipes of her mother or grandmother's and use the dishes, right? These dishes that the recipes were served on, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and just weaving that into everyday life. And I just think that's spectacular. And, you know, I had Jana, my grandmother, my Baba, you know, passed away years and years ago, but she was of Polish descent and was the most phenomenal cook ever. There was never anything in her fridge, but I used to think that she had this magical oven that there was always something in, but she used to make the best pierogies in the world. And I never made them with her. And nor did any of my siblings. My stepmother did, and she became, I think, as wonderful and a very close second to my grandmother. But this recipe wasn't written anywhere, and now they're both gone. And that was such a mistake, you know, I think on our part. And we did try 5 years ago. We were at my sister's place in Florida, all of us, for Christmas. And on Christmas Eve, we gave it our best shot, you know, and we did make them. They were nowhere near as good as my grandmother's, but even something as simple as that, right? Because many times those recipes aren't written down, right? They're in their head, and you have to do it with them, you know, if you want that to be legacy. And I think food, there's a lot of legacy in food, right? And traditions, and, you know, and rituals. So yeah.
And gatherings.
Yeah.
And there's a correlation. There have actually been studies done, and there's a correlation between doing legacy work and having an easier death. People who are actively working on legacy, you know, either documenting or sorting photos or making these gifts that they're leaving, if they're actively working on legacy, they require less pain medication, they require less medication to help calm their nerves and relieve their stress and anxiety. And it becomes, for many people, just a really joyful thing. It's like, these are gifts for people you love, or for a community that you love. And that's kind of exciting when you think about it. And that too is a gift in death, that we're able to leave these beautiful things behind. But there's also, you know, when we talk about legacy, we also need to be cognizant of truly, what are we leaving behind? You know, what are we leaving behind? And there's also we were taught a correlation between how you live your life and what your death looks like. You know, so if you go through your life not taking care of any of the details, not dealing with, you know, emotional fallout, not dealing and doing your own work, and probably not taking care of the pertinent details surrounding, you know, life and death, your life could look your death could look pretty messy, right? Because there'll be all this unresolved stuff, no planning, nothing going on. And that is really, when we were talking with lawyers, that's just a horrible mess to leave for people.
Horrible legacy.
It is a horrible
Horrible
legacy. You know, we
to do
heard,
that.
you know, just stories, and I'm sure we all know people who are, you know, in probate when it just drags on and on and on and on. So not only have they lost someone they love, now they're financially encumbered by this death, and, you know, in court or fighting over things or trying to take care of details that were never taken care of in life by the person. And there's also, you know, when we talk about one of the things that I'm sure people have heard of, something called Swedish death cleaning, which is kind of a neat concept. No, well, so it's basically going through your house and preparing it for death, but not necessarily, although you would like your house to be, you know, clean and in good order, but your stuff, like your stuff, you know. And I have 4 daughters, and I inherited a lot of family things that, had anyone asked me, I probably would have said, I really don't want those things. But I inherited, you know, my great grandmother's table, and yeah, like my house is full of antiques. I don't even like antiques, but I am beholden. I feel responsible for these big physical items, you know, because they were given to me to take care of. And that's a very weighty legacy to leave somebody, you know, especially if you don't know they want these things. And I think we just assume in life that people are going to love the things that we love, and that they're going to take care of the things that we take care of. And we hold on to things for people and fill our homes and our lives with things that maybe the people we love don't want. So part of my legacy project that I'm working on at this stage in life is I ask my daughters, you know, what do you want? Like, what am I holding on to for you? And what am I not holding on to? And what is the importance of it? And I have one daughter who's quite open. If I leave her any antiques, they'll be on the curb before I'm even cremated, you know, because she does not want them. And my children don't want to be tied necessarily to a graveyard. They're travelers. They don't know where they're going to be or what life is going to look like. And the thought of having to travel somewhere, you know, to care for my grave site, or feel that they're not caring for my grave, is a heavy weight for them. That's not something they want to inherit. So I'm mindful, and especially as my children, you know, age. I have my eldest is 22, my youngest is still 6, but there's a couple in between. And as they become adults, to have adult conversations with them about it. But even my 6-year-old is so comfortable with that. She'll say, "Oh, Mom, I like your earrings. Can I have those ones when you die?" Because they're all, you know, but it is so calming for me, and it is such a relief for me to know that, first of all, you know, they're not going to be fighting about anything when I'm gone, because we've all sat down and discussed it, right? And that they're going to, because they know the plans and things are going to be taken care of, they're going to be able to take care of each other. The last thing I want, and I really ask people to think about it, but, you know, what does this look like? My daughters have been up at the hospital with me, or at home, I'm dying. They're drinking coffee. They're not sleeping. They're trying to take care of other details. Do I really want them to write my obituary? I don't think so. Do I want them to choose the picture, the last picture the world is going to see of me? I really don't think so. You know, I want to have control over these things. And I don't want them to have to stress about any of it or lose sleep over any of it, and not even remember my death, you know. And that's all part of legacy. Legacy is how we live our lives and how we plan. It doesn't always have to be a physical object, although it can be. It's just so many things wrapped into one, but it really is everything we're leaving behind, the good, bad, and the, you know, the unplanned. So it's really important to sit with that and figure out what is that going to look like. And so Swedish death planning, we do that. We help you decide. We help you make your list. We help you have those conversations with your family. And then it's really, can be really a really liberating process if you know your kids don't want something, to just let it go. That's why you're holding on to it, you know. And then the house is ready and everything is sorted and people know what is for whom, or some people, you know, write names on things with tape or whatever your system that you're comfortable with. It's so that no one's going through your diaries or looking at things that maybe you don't want them. Maybe I don't want my daughters to read, letters that I wrote to my partner, or maybe, so how do I ensure that that doesn't, in a respectful way, that they don't have to, those are all the kind of concepts and conversations that we try and help people have.
But when Jana was talking about like graveyards, and I think even since the spring, right, with COVID, and you look at death, how it changed, right? How, not necessarily here, but in parts of the world, in parts of the United States, where people couldn't be with their loved ones, they couldn't bury them, like that. I can't even fathom how awful that must have been, but it's also, I think, gives us that opportunity to really think about those things. And I want to share that. So yesterday, what was the anniversary of my stepmother's death, and my brother had posted a picture of her memorial. So my stepmother was not in a graveyard. She is my father lives on Manitoulin Island, and there's this beautiful, if you look at my Facebook page, you'll see it, but there's this beautiful metal statue that's life-size of an angel sitting, and there was a gazebo built around it, and there is plants and moss, and it's nice. Absolutely, fairy lights. So we tuck her away in the winter, and then we bring her to life every spring. And so my father needs just go out the door to be with her, because he's quite elderly now. And it was just such a tasteful, and again, it was my older controlling sister who organized it, but I had never seen anything like that. And I thought, what a wonderful thing, right? Because for my father he would have to go to a graveyard where his parents are, and it's almost 2 hours away. And so the chance of him visiting or whatever, would probably be just a couple times a year. So here she is, and she has some ashes tucked in the back of the statue, and then the bulk of her ashes were put in Georgian Bay, as she did have those wishes. But it was one of those, when I die, I just want to be cremated, my ashes, sprinkled in that's as far as the planning went. But that was honored. And then all of the children and the grandchildren received a little urn of ashes. So we all have that. And I thought that was very cool, right? Like things have changed, right? Where we don't just have this one option or the other. And I think that's what I love about this work, is exploring all the different kinds of options there are now, and that it can be tailored to each person, and you can kind of do really what you like, there's the whole
limitless. The whole fabric of death has changed, and even if we want to talk about celebration of life and funeral, and how that has changed, and how the options, it no longer has to be, the $15,000 coffin, and sort of what we've come to view as the traditional funeral ceremony. We saw some really beautiful, just pine coffins that were certainly more environmentally friendly. A lot of people are leaning towards greener funerals, but there are also some, beautiful ceremony and ritual happening, like the coffin is there during the vigil, and the people who come get to write beautiful messages onto this beautiful pine coffin, that will then the person who's being buried or cremated will then take these messages with them, and they're very personal messages, and it's very beautiful, and it creates, it gives people a sense of purpose, it helps people participate in your death and feel like they have some kind of power also. And there's been some really beautiful work done with shrouds in the same way, or people even designing their own shrouds before they die, and decorating them or painting them with meaningful symbols. There's ceremony that can take place after death that has always been ritual and really beautiful. Washing your loved one's body is a really beautiful ceremony that we don't talk about, but has happened forever, and with love and dignity, and how do we care for our loved one's body once the spirit is gone? It doesn't have to. How long can we stay with our loved one when they're gone? What does it look like if I want to have a home death? And then, I don't know what to do. When do I call the coroner? Do I call 911 when my loved one dies? Like, there's so many after death details that we can help fill people in about, and design the rituals and teach some of the ceremony that we've just forgotten how to do. These things are still within all of us, and there's so many different, the landscape of funerals is changing, and so there are a lot of people who are going for totally green and zero footprint, and what does that look like, and what are even the costs associated with funerals now, and where can you have them or not have them? Like, that's all important dialogue so that people can make informed choice, because you don't know what you don't know, and you can't make informed choice without the information. So we don't have all of the information yet, but we're actively working at putting together what we think is pertinent information for our area. We obviously don't have all of the same services here that some of the larger centers might have. We don't have them here yet, but, actively working towards gathering the information so it's easier for people to access. Yeah. And I'm sure there are a few other points here. I'm just going to check my notes.
I think, just on that point, right, how often you might know someone who's passed away, and you read the obituary and there is no service and no celebration of life and nothing, and I see that, I won't say more often than not, but it's becoming quite common. So there just seems to be, a departure from what we always did traditionally, right? So, I've certainly had my, piqued my curiosity around this whole topic as well. What are people doing, and why aren't they, doing the traditional thing, right? Where it's a visitation and a service and then burial, right? So there's a change and shift for sure.
And it was interesting when we visited Mount Pleasant and the crematorium, and then, where they hold their funerals. And there's also a cemetery at Mount Pleasant, quite a beautiful cemetery. And we were discussing with the funeral director there just the changes that they have seen, and a lot of it comes down to people aren't wanting to spend that kind of money for a funeral anymore, which is valid. And can't. And so as a result of this, the funeral industry is becoming more creative. There are more creative applications for lower prices that are beautiful, and certainly the process of planning the funeral is far more interactive than it's ever been. The choices are so much greater, and they're, so it doesn't always have to look the way that we thought it had to look. And then a lot of people are saying, I don't like that look, so I'm not going to have a funeral. But I think it's important to remember that whether you call it a funeral or a celebration of life, or just, you're just having a little get together, it's important, I think, for the people who are left behind, the people who have been left, to have something to mark that moment, a ceremony for closure. It's something that we've always done forever. There's been something, a moment, a word. And I think that without those moments and those words, there can be a lack of closure, and people are just kind of, what next? We need that moment, I think. But again, we are not ever there. That's just my personal view on that. We're not ever sitting in the role of death doula and telling people what their beliefs are, or ever, we have no opinions when it comes to, we certainly have our own opinions as people and mothers and people who are going to be dying, but as professionals, I don't have a political view on medical assistance in death. I don't have a view on, hospital death as opposed to home death. My view is I am here to help you articulate your beliefs and explore them and figure out what it really is that you want. And then I am here to support you, and Tracy is here to support you in any way we can, as long as it falls under our scope of work and that we're legally able to help you do it. Those are kind of the parameters But because life and death are so individual to each person, so is the role of death doula. You know, we've given you a huge overview and snippets of all these different areas that are pertinent, and they are pertinent, but it all depends on the person. You know, if you've lived your life this way your whole life, you're probably not going to veer out over here in death. You know, it's probably going to be a little closer to who you've been. So yeah, it's quite interesting to work with different people, and even within different cultures, you know, to find out what is culturally appropriate or not. Or many people now are starting to investigate their lineage and see what that looks like in death. You know, what were the cultural traditions, as we all sort of try and find our way back to our roots, you know, and that brings forth some. So again, while we don't know about obviously every cultural tradition, we're always willing to work with people to help introduce different elements of whatever is important to them in death. Yeah. Do you have any questions, Allison?
Yeah, I do actually. Do you have a name for your business yet?
We think so. We think we're going to be called Cycles.
Cycles, like CYC?
SYCLES, yes, Cycles, because we see it all. Certainly our emblem is a spiral.
Okay.
All just these cycles the cycle of life and death and moving through them, and you know, it's all really the same thing. You know,
great.
Well, thank you. We're working on the details for that, and some of the things that you'll be hearing from us about in the next couple of months will be things like workshops that we'll be offering. We're just navigating through this online world now, which looks a little different than we thought our workshops would look like. So we'll do some workshops on planning your vigil, you know, and then certainly about Swedish death cleaning, like how do you put your affairs, your physical space in order, and then even just probably a workshop to start just talking about the different places you can die and what that looks like, and costs associated with, you know, what does it mean if you go to hospice? What does it mean if you can't die at home and you're in the hospital? What can it look like? And what does it mean to die at home? You know, so those are the kinds of themes that we'll be exploring.
It's so interesting how much it parallels a birth doula.
It is. Yeah, it really is. It is. And so the gentleman that Henry, that we studied with, I just can't pronounce his last name without the book here for me. Here it is. Sorry. So I went to see him at a book. He published a book, and he was speaking at the Institute of Traditional Medicine. So I went to hear him speak before we started the course. And his name is Henry Fursko-Weiss, and he wrote this book, Caring for the Dying, which is sort of it is the handbook for death doulas. And he has a really interesting story because he started the whole movement in North America, and he actually worked in hospital. I think he was like a discharge planner, social worker in the hospital, and he was devastated by what he was seeing. And so then he went and studied to become a birth doula, because he thought there was something in that, right? Like in this support to bring a life into the world. And then he flipped it to be the support for the person leaving the world. So there is such a huge parallel. And many of the, you know, the fact that we're not medical professionals and we're not there to take care of your legal details, but we are there solely as a guide or a support. And so his whole program in the States, his whole training program is based on the flip of birth doula and death doula. Yeah, it's a growing field. And in Canada, because it's so new, there isn't legislation really surrounding it, you know, so it's kind of evolving and shifting. And I don't know when there will be stricter, you know, legislation around certification or that kind of thing, but we will certainly keep on top of that. Yeah.
And do you know of any countries in the world where it's funded, or at least partially funded?
Don't know. I think that there might be, depending in the states, I think there might be some depending on your insurance, I can reach out to Henry and ask him, but I don't know of anywhere that it's funded, except, yeah, I don't know. Obviously, when you see even in North Bay, like the lovely Vicky Rivard is working at the hospice. She graduated from the same program and is a death doula, and she's working in hospice. That's her job. So that's kind of,
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's tremendous progress. That's a really progressive step to take, to have a death doula there. I'm not sure what her entire role entails, and then she was shut down during COVID, so she's just going back now. So we're planning on having reaching out to Vicky and having some dialogue with her.
Mhm.
And but it is possible, absolutely, just like in a birth situation, to have a death doula as part of your team at the hospital if you're dying in the hospital. Most of our training in Toronto focused around dying at home. So not that we are locked into death at home, but that's where most of our training took place, and most of the people that we were training with, that's where their perspective was. But of course, any of those skills are completely transferable to any space. There was Henry himself actually is planning on dying on his back porch. He doesn't care if it's, and then he's going for a very green funeral, and he's just wants his body put out in the forest on his property to decompose and do whatever.
Allowed to do that?
Well, I think where he is, he's allowed to, but he's in the States and it's totally different rules and laws. So we're just learning right now what all of those, and
There's nowhere in Canada that you could do that right
no.
now, but there was a couple of places in the States.
Yeah. And there are a few places I've looked up online that are looking at having greener cemeteries in Canada. So we're just trying to follow the evolution of where they are going.
Mm-hmm.
And what that can look like for people, because obviously that's a huge concern for so many people now who are trying very diligently to reduce their footprint. And death can have a huge footprint. I was shocked. The crematorium in Mount Pleasant, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars they just spent to revamp their crematorium so it's much lower emissions.
Oh, okay.
So that it is a greener place, because it's not a green process. I mean, it might be greener than being buried if you look at how long the casket remains, or I don't know, depending on how you are weighing them out against each other, the criteria, but there's certainly room for great improvement in the world of death, and how we're the chemicals and toxins and things that are going into the earth. And
so interesting, like, am I on mute? No. As you start to actually think about it, like for a while I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'll probably get cremated, that makes sense. But now that I actually think about it, I'm like, do I really want my body burned like into ashes, and why? So it's interesting, like you can plan it sort of and think about it to the nth degree.
But you have to really move. I have found just through the course of training and sitting with it and having to do the work, like we had to do some pretty intense practices and exercises while we were working. Like we actually had to hold space for classmates while they were in vigil, and they had to hold space, and we had to imagine, and we did all kinds of guided meditation, which is a helpful tool for end of life. And so to really put ourselves in the spot of what might it really feel like to be dying and releasing and surrendering. And for all of my let's talk about it, I wasn't in the right frame of mind to really accept that. It was a very emotional exercise for me, because it's okay to know something here, and we so often do that, but we never sit with it and bring it down to our heart, right? And then open our heart to really sit with that moment and that experience and explore it. And it's difficult, like it's not easy, but it is so worthwhile to do that. You have a better understanding of how precious life is if you can sit through those moments, and just how every little interaction can change someone's life or has meaning and impact. And also it is really a very strong impetus to get it all straight for the people who we love that we're leaving behind. We don't want to, the last thing I want my children to do is to have to go into death unprepared, because they will model my views and my experiences. Those will become their own experiences. And I would like to, as a parent, and as a death doula, but even just speaking from a personal perspective as a mother, I would really like to model, grace, so that they're not afraid when their time comes. I don't want it to be my grandmother's death. It was terrifying for me. I didn't know what to expect. It was in a hospital. I didn't have anybody with me to explain what act of death, an act of dying looks like, and what to expect. And I was terrified, and then you lock that into your brain, and that becomes your story, and then you prepare yourself for that kind of death, but it doesn't have to be that kind of death.
No.
Mm-hmm. Really worthwhile process, and we'll be doing things like that. And guided, a really beautiful tool that we learned about is practicing a guided meditation with someone who is palliative, but one that is specific to them and their favorite place maybe, or a moment, and just working with them with this guided meditation, and then using the guided meditation during death. There are many beautiful things, and it doesn't have to be us holding vigil. One of the things we're so excited to do is to teach people. That is the whole idea, to teach people how to hold vigil for their loved ones and how to hold space. Of course, we're there to assist, and of course, we will facilitate if that's what you need. But wouldn't it be beautiful if our community could reach the point in all communities where we can just hold each other's hand and just walk each other through it, because we know it. It is who we are, and it is what we are. It is part of our natural and innate ability, and this beautiful cycle that we live in, So we just need to remember it and just be reminded a little bit, and then maybe we'll reach a point where we no longer need doulas, death doulas, because we're all death doulas.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Isn't that the greatest legacy of all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
If we want to open it up to any questions.
I was just going to say that, yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Just type them in the chat box there.
And Allison, I don't know if you remember, one of the first things Tracy and I did, we went to one of the, what's it called? I've just forgotten. The event you held, I'm sorry. The
Death Cafe.
Death Cafe, thank
Cafe.
you. And that was sort of our, we hadn't started our course then yet. And we went to, and it was really, a terrifying thought, to go to this Death Cafe. It seemed like such an alien, and what are we going to do? But it was such a worthwhile and beautiful experience. And I think that none of us in that room had ever been given the opportunity to just talk about death before. Without agendas, without motives, but just to share our experiences and our views about death. And that was such a worthwhile exercise, how normal it is and how everyone has experiences and thoughts and feelings around death, but no place to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Now, had you planned on taking the end-of-life training before you attended the Death Cafe, or was it afterwards?
I think it was.
Remember, I don't
we
remember
might have.
that.
I think we might have known about the end-of-life training, but we weren't entirely sure, because that seemed like a pretty.
Or we're waiting for the next semester or something.
Or waiting to get. It's a bit of a process to, if you want to be a death doula, you have to, you have to write an essay, you have to get references from the community, and it's like going to school, I guess, for anything else. You have to really, I think they really vet people to see if it's going to be a good fit, because it's such an intimate relationship that you're building with the other people and the instructors at the school. But I would highly recommend it to anyone. It's just so valuable. And I think now, just because I'm studying at ITM for the other course that I'm involved in, and we've moved it all online.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some benefits to that. You lose some things, but you gain so much more. I don't have to travel to Toronto now to hold clinic. Clients don't have to travel to Toronto to meet me in a physical space. You're able to gracefully maneuver through it online. And I'm pretty sure that in the coming year, the Death Doula course will be online also, which will open it up to people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to take it because of the travel. because it is a bit of a commitment to journey to downtown Toronto, right?
It's a weekend, intense weekend, right?
Yeah, you do it for 6
Several
months. Yeah.
Yeah.
16 times. Yeah, but it's yeah, it's very, very, very worthwhile to do it if you're interested at all in death and working with your community, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So how long would you typically be with a client and a family? Like
So
what
that,
would you
yeah,
do?
that depends again on what stage they're coming to us at.
Yeah.
Are you coming to just talk about death? Are you coming because you can't talk to your family about death and just need us to hold space and bounce ideas around? Or are you gonna hire us to work with you through all of the stages? So or do you just need someone to come and help you plan vigil and sit vigil with you? I think it would be really difficult, but not impossible, to be called in to sit vigil as a doula with someone I didn't know. I'm obviously, you're in that position often where you guys sit vigil with people, but as a death doula, I don't know that would be, it would be nice to actually to have a client and talk to the client and help come to some kind of understanding. But again, everyone, no one should die alone unless that's their specific wish. And I think that we're certainly open to helping our community wherever we can. I don't know if that answered your question. I think it just depends on the requirements.
Yeah, for sure. So anywhere along the process really that you're needed?
Yeah, and there's something interesting that, and I've talked to you about this, and we're still actively working on planning a death salon.
Oh, yes.
There are people in Toronto who do hospice work or death doula work with people on the streets, people who have no homes. And that's something that really we've talked about it a lot, and is really an important concept that we're constantly talking about and feeling our way through, because everyone should be afforded dignity in death. And I try and sit with that and imagine what that would look like if you had no home and no family. And how can we, as a compassionate community, make ourselves available to some of these marginalized communities who could, I'm sure, use support like every other community could, in end-of-life care. So at our death salon, we're going to have a speaker who does death doula work on the streets in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an exciting, I'm as a professional and also as just a community member, I'm really interested in learning more about how we can make sure that everyone has access.
And when are you thinking of having your death salon?
Well, we had been trying to see where this whole COVID is going, because
restrictions around Catholic
numbers.
Okay.
Because we had originally thought of, the death salon is different than Death Cafe, and because it has, people, different professionals speaking, and it's not just a wide open dialogue about death. There's some structure to it, and we had approached the arts community to also do, just do a show called The Art of Dying, and explore what death looks like through art also, and have that on display, and have different speakers and people from different industries that are involved in death speaking, and certainly some fun workshops, like maybe dinner date with death, and having a dinner party and about death, and maybe bringing a picture of a loved one, and having some icebreakers, and having just some very candid discussion about death with strangers over, good food and some things like that. So we're just trying to figure out whether we're going to move everything online, or if there is going to be room. It would be really nice to do it in person too, I think. But if that's not possible, then we'll have to, so probably in the late fall we can.
Yeah, keep us posted.
I will. I would kind of like to do it around Halloween. I think that would be a really fun time to do it.
Yep. Yeah.
And just on a note, there's something Tracy and I, because we're always just chatting about this, but we were talking about, just to sum up sort of our dysfunction that we have in our society about death. If we look at graveyards, we put our most beloved souls in graveyards, and then we make movies and write books about all the monsters in there.
Yeah.
So the dichotomy that we have, that these are terrifying terrifying, horrible places, and yet this is where we're surrendering our loved ones. So there's something.
Yeah, and we go to visit them,
Like,
and we're expected to visit them.
Yeah,
right?
so there's this dichotomy and dysfunction. So I'm all about Halloween and sort of really exploring what that looks like and what it really was, and the celebration, and the crossing over, and how it's moved from one sacred ritual into this sort of commercial monsters, and that's kind of interesting. So yeah, I would do it on Halloween.
Okay, well, we look forward to hearing more about it. Can everybody see the chat box? There's an entry there from Kayla. This isn't so much a question, but I want to really thank you for opening up about death. I am a freshly new placement student at NPCN, and death has always been more of a scary thing for myself or even my family to talk about. And you have opened my heart and mind up on how to eventually open up about death and process with my family, but even during my placement at NPCN. It will greatly help me understand more about my position and the bereavement training I will be going through. Thank you. I'm glad that I could be present during this Let's Talk.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we have a few students with us today, so that's great.
Oh, very nice. And hey, tell us a little bit about what you're doing, Allison, if we have a few minutes.
Like my role at NPCN, or
what is going on there with COVID, and how are you guys navigating through that?
Okay, so the middle of March, when everything started, the pandemic, we shut down face-to-face visits, and I was working from home for about 3 months. So I came back to the office in June, and we have 2 new interns here, full-time for a year. Michaela, she does the bereavement program, and Lane does the palliative program. So they've really helped kind of during this time and in general. So I feel like we can kind of expand our services with training and just reaching out to the community because we have this expanded capacity. We have, I think we're gonna have 15 students soon, so they're working on projects for the community as well. And we recently went back to face-to-face visits. I think it was last week. So all the volunteers that want to go back to face-to-face have to do infection control training and just understand their risks. We're not forcing anybody to go back. It's totally up to them. If you are over 60, if you have any immunocompromising conditions, we don't really recommend it. So that's just starting this last week. It just started. So we have a couple of volunteers that are going face to face. Yeah, with the proper PPE and infection control procedures.
It really changes the face of it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does for sure. But we've also found during this time that people don't mind the phone so much. So talking on the phone or doing face-to-face visits virtually, some people kind of want to stick with that. It allows for more flexibility, and people can also stay safe in their homes if they are worried about contracting COVID.
That's solid, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, Tracy, I would love to talk further with you about the role that you folks play in the community, so we can be educated a little more as to, the ins and outs, so that we can certainly let clients know what some of their options are.
Definitely. Yeah, so it's just about 2:15, so I think we'll end now. Thank you guys so much, and I look forward to hearing about all the exciting things that you guys are doing. You seem very passionate about what you do, and that's so important. So I wish you every success with your new business, and yeah, I think people will be really lucky to have you.
Yeah. Encourage people to maybe, think about your end of life, right? Like start thinking about it now, and try and start the dialogue with your family and loved ones, and just see what you have to navigate, right? And it is difficult for sure, but maybe you can change their mind, right? If they see that you're not full of discomfort, that gives permission, right? But it might take a little time, but definitely important.
And just a reminder too that you can't have honest dialogue with anyone unless you first have it with yourself. So you have to just find out where you really are sitting with death, and you're for that. Thank you so much for having us, Allison.
Okay, you guys take care. Thank you. Bye.